Evil West is a game that took me totally by surprise. I didn't even know that it existed until 5 days before its launch. I hadn't heard or seen anything about it, and I just kind of stumbled onto it when I was looking through an upcoming games list online. At first, I thought it was going to be some sort of survival horror style game, along the lines of the more modern Resident Evil games, or perhaps something like The Evil Within, but I decided to look up some gameplay on YouTube to check it out for myself. What I saw was not in fact a horror game. Instead, it was a visually impressive, gory action game with a somewhat horror-themed coating. I was actually looking for my next game to review at that point, so I decided to get it on day one, and I'm so happy that I did. And what I'm about to say isn't exactly a unique take, and it has been said many times by other people already, but Evil West does a great job of invoking the third-person action games of the PS3 and the Xbox 360 era. It's a very straightforward title that, for the most part, simply gets to the point, and for me personally, that's a very welcome thing right now. The game looks and runs beautifully, the sound design is absolutely on point, and the combat is crunchy and satisfying. A single playthrough should only take you around 10 to 13 hours to complete, which isn't that long, but it's not being sold at full price either, so that's something to consider. I mean, would you rather have a game that's 13 hours long and packed full of fun, or a bland and boring game that clocks in at over 100 hours? If you were to ask me that same question, I know exactly which one I would choose. So what is Evil West? Well, it's a third-person action shooter developed by Flying Wild Hog, who you may know from the Shadow Warrior games or perhaps Trek to Yomi. It's basically a textbook example of the genre. It's narrative-driven and has you dispatching all manner of beasties and monsters as you progress through the generally linear missions and levels. Games that were structured this way were very common back in the days of the PS3 and the Xbox 360, and essentially has you watching a cutscene, getting dropped into the start of a mission, fighting your way through that mission, confronting the boss, and then repeating that process until the end. There's also things like collectibles, character upgrades, some very light puzzle elements, and two-player online co-op if you want to play through the entire thing with a friend. I didn't actually get to test co-op myself, but from what I've been reading, people seem to be enjoying it with no problems. As usual, I won't be spoiling the story for you, but I will give you the initial setup. Set in an alternate version of the old American West, you play as Jesse Rentier, an agent for the secret vampire hunting institute. You and the organization that you work for are essentially the last line of defense between the normal everyday people of America and the ravenous vampire horde. Right at the start of the game, you're introduced to a high-ranking vampire who's attempting to put a specific plan of his into action. Essentially, he wants to declare war on the humans before their technology becomes a threat to their kind. So to put things simply, it becomes Jesse's responsibility to thwart this plan. I'd say that Evil West's gameplay and features can only really be broken down into two large sections. You've got the combat itself and then the character upgrades. First of all, we'll take a look at the upgrade screen, which contains permanent upgrades for Jesse, unlockable perks, and some cosmetic skins. As you play through the game, you'll be killing hordes of monsters and picking up lots of money. Taking out monsters grants you XP, which levels Jesse up and unlocks perk points. The perk points can then be spent on unlocking various perks from these two tabs, some of which are level gated. You can unlock a lot of different abilities here, including extra bullets in your guns, AoE slam attacks, extended combos, juggles, and much more besides. It's worth noting that if you're not happy with your perk selections, there are machines throughout the game that will allow you to reset your perk trees if you so choose. The cash that you find laying around each level or hidden in small secret areas can be used to buy upgrades for Jesse's weapons. These include his gauntlet, 6-shooter, rifle, and weapons that you unlock later on. You can unlock a wide range of benefits, including things like bullets being returned to your magazine if you hit an enemy's weak spot, or being able to juggle an airborne enemy monster with your 6-shooter after knocking them up into the air. On the character tab, you'll have the option to swap between acquired skins on Jesse's weapons, accessories, and clothes. Most of these skins are found during exploration by venturing ever so slightly off the beaten path. The hidden areas are very small and don't require a lot of effort to discover, so these skins aren't too hard to get hold of. And so with that out of the way, let's move on to combat itself. I think combat in Evil West is best described as a methodical dance of death. Every single action that you take and every single action that your opponents take are very deliberate and purposeful, and that's worth keeping in mind as we continue. Your go-to close-range attack is a standard melee combo, which can be extended, buffed, and upgraded through the perk system. At mid-range you can fire off your 6-shooter, which allows you to keep some distance between you and your enemy while still enabling you to lay down some damage. It can also stagger many of the lower tier enemies that may be charging at you, which sets them up to be countered. At long range, you'll be able to make use of your high caliber rifle, which seems to be similar to something like a Winchester as far as I can tell. It has a strong aim assist, hits for good damage, and is the only way to take out a target's weak point. As with everything else in the game, both of these two weapons can be upgraded and improved. The melee combo, the 6-shooter, and the rifle, when used in unison, make up the basis of your offense and are always there for you to fall back on if you need them. Over the course of the game, you'll unlock more weapons like the flamethrower and the shotgun amongst others, but they're quite powerful, and because of that, they're all on cooldowns. They fill the role of a weapon and a tool depending on the situation, and once again, can all be enhanced. In addition, you'll also have access to other offensive options, such as Jesse's Gauntlet, combo starters, launchers, and automatic finishing moves. The Gauntlet is powered by electricity and can be a very versatile tool depending on what you need it to do. Firstly, right from the start of the game, the Gauntlet can heal you a decent chunk by simply tapping a button. It does go on to a moderate cooldown once used, but if it didn't, I suppose it would be kinda broken, so it makes sense. Not far into the game, you'll unlock the ability to drag the monsters towards you with the Gauntlet and stun them with an electrical current. This opens them up to a flurry of punches, and later on, you'll actually be able to drag yourself across the map to the enemy. Launchers are exactly what they sound like. You simply hold down the standard attack button and many of the fodder enemies will be popped up into the air. At that point, you can juggle them with standard attacks, cannonball them into other enemies or environmental hazards, or even unload an entire barrel of bullets into them with your revolver if you've unlocked that ability. Finishers work in much the same way as glory kills do from the modern Doom games. You don't have access to these gory executions right from the start, but it is a relatively quick unlock. When a monster's HP is fully depleted, there's a high chance that they'll go into a defeated state and begin to flash. You simply press the standard attack button in front of them and Jesse will automatically give them one of a number of grisly deaths. If you fail to finish an enemy in this state, they'll simply just die on their own after a short time has passed. They won't recover and get back into the fight. It's also worth noting that the finisher animations are different for each monster in the game, and enemies killed this way do drop healing items. Having said all that though, I don't really want to show too much here and spoil the new attacks, tools and abilities that you acquire, but rest assured there is a lot to get to grips with. And before we get on to my personal opinions, let's quickly go over performance and availability. I played this on a PlayStation 5 and I would imagine that this review and the following information would be relevant to the Series X version as well. As with most current gen games, you've got the option to choose between quality and performance modes. Quality mode provides 4K resolution at 30 FPS and performance mode gives you 1080p at 60 FPS. I always favour gameplay over graphics, so obviously I went for the performance mode, but the choice is yours. Also, just a quick side note, you'll notice above this setting there's an arachnophobia toggle. There isn't any large spiders or spider-like enemies in the game, but there are some caves that are absolutely teeming with hundreds of smaller harmless ones. It doesn't bother me personally, but it is nice to have the option there for people that are affected by it. During my 13-hour playthrough, the frame rate and performance were virtually flawless. I mean, I'm sure there were some dropped frames here and there, but I didn't notice anything at all. I had 0 crashes and nothing ever happened that would block my progress. The only issue I had was a very minor audio bug that occurred a couple of times. There's a monster that you'll meet later on that tracks you with an energy beam, and it kinda sounds like a sizzling steak or something similar. When you kill that monster, the sound effect can actually keep playing until you reach the next cutscene or the end of the level. It didn't happen with every encounter of that particular monster, so I'm not really sure what triggers it. That said, I don't think it's a big deal, but I did think it was worth mentioning. Evil West is available right now on PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series consoles, and PC. Physical copies are widely available. So what are my personal feelings towards Evil West? Well, first I'd like to address one of the main concerns that I'm sure many people are going to have. Is the game worth the price considering how short it is? Now, of course, value is subjective. I've talked about that many times in my reviews, but in my opinion, yes. The game is absolutely worth the asking price to me. I could understand a few people saying otherwise, but as far as I'm concerned, this was a very positive experience. And you know what? I'd actually go a few steps further and say that I would have happily paid full price for it if that's what they were asking. By the time you see this video, I will have already begun playing the next game for review, but I will be coming back to Evil West sometime down the line in order to tackle New Game Plus and unlock everything, that's for sure. Now, in terms of gameplay, graphics, and story, I was very happy with everything that I experienced. It's funny though, I've seen a couple of outlets saying things like the 1080p 60 FPS mode is blurry and muddy. On a technical level, those observations may actually be true, but while playing through the game myself, I never once noticed that anything looked blurry or muddy. To be fair, I wasn't specifically looking for things like that, but I suppose the more important thing to note is that none of the visuals in the game ever distracted me or seemed blatantly bad. You know, I think it's one of those situations where you would notice it if you were analyzing the image, but probably not during normal gameplay, if that makes sense. I genuinely thought the game looked great from start to finish, with a nice variety of locations to visit and monsters to fight. Each level has a great feeling of atmosphere, and despite all of them being linear with rather little in the way of exploration, the designers have managed to make the maps feel much more vast than they actually are. That's something that I've always appreciated in straightforward games like this. I noticed the same thing when I played Outriders, and I did appreciate it there as well. The cutscenes are genuinely impressive, and they seem to be of a very high quality, especially when you consider that this game is a discounted AA release. I can't really say too much about the story for the sake of spoilers, but I thought it was fine overall. I think there's some really cool and interesting stuff in here, although I think a lot of players will pretty much see all of it coming a mile off. There isn't really much going on in terms of things like huge reveals or secrets, but what's here works, it's fine, and it moves the plot along, so there's that. There seems to be a good amount of natural sounding and well done voice work in the game as well. I think most of the voice cast do a great job with what's written for them, and only a couple of the characters seemed a bit off during the entire game. The writing itself is fine, I suppose, but the game's much more of a corny action movie than it is a thought-provoking film, so I felt it was perfectly fine for what it was. Gameplay-wise is where I think the game really shines. The combat encounters in Evil West are so Moorish and just incredibly chunky feeling. Believe it or not, the combat at times can feel like you're playing a turn-based RPG but in real time. I know that sounds kind of odd, and it is kind of hard to explain as well, but it's sort of like the enemy goes, then you go, then the enemy goes, and then you go, etc, etc. Every type of incoming threat has a specific answer that you can provide, and when you do so, it gives you the advantage and you get to perform an extra turn, so to speak. I don't know if you guys are following me on this one, but it's just how it feels to me. Like, you can do a lot of stuff in this game, but you also have cooldowns to consider, and Jesse isn't exactly agile. As I said, every threat has an answer, and these answers can't just be blurted out. You need to observe, wait, and respond correctly, which gives you the upper hand and allows you to press the advantage. It's much more applicable on the higher difficulties though. If you play on easy, you won't have too much trouble and it'll feel a bit more like a power fantasy, but on normal or higher, you will need to be a bit more careful and avoid button mashing if possible. During combat, some enemies will occasionally flash a weak point circle that tells you an attack is imminent, and there's also a sound cue to listen out for, so don't miss that. But the idea here is that you use your rifle to hit that weak point. The rifle has a huge amount of aim assist which helps you find your mark mid-fight, and once you land a hit, it deals big damage and stops the attack. It sometimes outright kills the enemy too. Some of the bosses use this mechanic as well. Hitting their weak points will either stop or disable a large incoming attack, so it's a good idea to weave the rifle into your gameplay where possible and get comfortable with it. Lastly, I know I've given Evil West a lot of praise, but it's important to say that I don't think this is the perfect video game. That's something that I don't really believe exists. The game is actively trying to be a more modern and polished version of similar games from the PS3 and the Xbox 360 era. That fact alone will probably be enough to turn some people away from it, and I do get that. This is an older and much simpler style of game. It's also relatively short for its asking price, as I mentioned earlier. In fact, the controls, movement, attack speed, and even some of the animations do feel a hell of a lot like God of War 2018. But a game like this is just not going to compete with a game like that in 2022, it just isn't. Now for me personally, I'd pick up Evil West over God of War 2018 and Ragnarok because, well, I just don't care about Kratos, the story in those games, or the franchise. But I know I'm going to be 100% in the minority on that one, which is fine. Actually, you know what? If you're just coming down from playing Ragnarok, it might not be a bad idea to try this one out. It's not anywhere near the same level of production value or scope, but if you like Ragnarok's combat, this is basically 13 hours of that. But, you know, with vampire hunting cowboys instead of the dad and boy combo. In my opinion, Evil West is a fun and creative callback to popular games from the late 2000s and may just be the very best of its kind. It looks great, plays exceedingly well, and doesn't outstay its welcome. I'd easily recommend it to someone looking to casually kill 13 hours, or to someone who wants to master a well-built combat system. The game offers an easy story mode playthrough for people who just want to play it, beat it, and move on, sure, but it's also got a ton of depth, New Game Plus, and multiple difficulty levels to extend its value if you want that. Ultimately, I think the game may just pass unnoticed by the majority of the gaming world, which unfortunately wouldn't surprise me. Maybe word of mouth will bring in a few more sales here and there, and I genuinely hope it does because I really enjoyed this one and I think loads of other players would as well if they gave it a chance. Its technical performance was rock solid and the combat system seems to be getting universal praise, so if you have any interest in this game, I would urge you to pick it up, even if it's just on sale in the future. In time though, I think people like myself will look back on this title fondly as a bit of a hidden gem, one that was completely adored by the few, but sadly ignored by the masses. If you enjoyed the video, I really hope you'll consider subscribing, and if you like what I do and want to help support the channel, please check out the first link in the video description down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.